we have arrived at the bedrock of the atheist argument against Christianity. This is the foundational question right here. Evil and suffering. Why does evil and suffering exist? If God is an all-powerful, all-knowing God, He's the ruler of all the universe, He has control over it, how could a good God allow suffering and pain to exist in a world that He created to be good? And what makes this question so impactful is because, and what we're going to spend time today, is we're going to be spending less time talking theoretically. We're going to spend less time talking philosophically. Like when it comes to the question of pain and suffering, it is a personal question. Because you have felt it. I have felt it. We have all, either collectively, individually, throughout our entire lives, will feel it. This is a question that you feel. It's not a question you think about. It's not a question you ponder. It's not a question you wonder and debate about. This is a question you feel, which makes it extremely personal. It makes it extremely emotional. It makes it extremely difficult to talk about, especially when you're talking from experience. And so we're going to try to be sensitive to that, but also address it head on. So to kind of kick us off, let me introduce you to a little bit of my suffering, and it's really me and Darian's suffering. So at the beginning of this year, Darian and I got pregnant right at the beginning of, was it the end of last year? Okay, sorry, the end of last year, we got pregnant. And it was an extremely awesome moment for about 2 weeks. So we celebrated. We did everything that expecting parents are supposed to do. I read like 2 giant books about parenting in 2 weeks. We began to organize our nursery. We began picking out names. We began making purchases, baby purchases, all the way up until the unthinkable happened. And we had a miscarriage. And it was devastating. And it was evil. And so the question that we all experience in suffering was the question that was on the forefront of both of our minds. Like, where was God in that moment? Where was He? How could God allow something happen, so terrible to happen to a young family, to a sweet child, and doesn't just allow it to happen just to our family, but this is something that happens to, come to find out, many women, the majority of women experience this some point in their life. So how could that happen? And you know, and you've had that same feeling and that same question. Maybe for you, it's over our country. Maybe for you, it's over the suicide of a close friend or somebody you knew. Maybe it's over a divorce whenever you were a kid of your parents, or some kind of divorce that affected you. Maybe it was a breakup between somebody you cared about. There's all kinds of reasons we feel this tension. And I believe there is a reason, and as we're going to see, I believe the reason actually points us towards the existence of God, not away from it. So we'll talk about that. But let's establish this problem. So there are 5 basic principles that philosopher Alvin Plantinga, we've talked about him before, I think in our Cosmos thing. There's 5 basic principles that he says every Christian believes when it comes to evil and suffering. So we'll walk through these. So first, God exists. That's pretty basic for Christians. God is omnipotent, meaning He's all-powerful. So God created the universe, and He has the ability to manipulate things that happen in the universe. So all-powerful, meaning He can intervene and make things happen to His will, i.e. like take away suffering or whatever. He is omniscient. He's omniscient. He is all-knowing. So God is aware of all of the suffering that exists in the world. It's not like He's naive to it. It's not like He's blind to it. He's not a distant God who lets the world function on its own. Like He knows and He's involved in it. God is wholly good. It's in His nature. It's not something He chooses to be. He can't choose to be evil. He is wholly good. It is all He is. And then finally, evil exists. So if you're going to understand God as a Christian, especially when it comes in line with evil and suffering, You have to wrestle with these. Now here's the problem, is that atheists argue that these assertions cannot be true all at the same time. So think about it. Okay, God exists. We'll put that one on the table. But if God is truly all-powerful and he is all good, then how does evil exist? Because if he has the ability to change it and he is good, then either he doesn't know about the evil or he's ignoring it. If God is all-knowing and all-powerful, so he knows that evil exists and he has the ability to change evil, then he must not be good because he's not changing it. Or if God is all-knowing and all-good, he knows that evil exists and it's not of his nature and it's not of his world, then he must not actually have the power to change it. This is the assertion that Christians make, or that atheists make. Like, all of these cannot be true at the same time. And so as Christians, we have to approach that. We have to say, okay, how do we comprehend all of these being true and still yet have number 5 there? How can evil still exist if our God truly is all-powerful, all-knowing, and wholly good? So the first thing we need to do is we need to define a couple of basic phrases here. First one being evil. Like, what is evil? It's often said that evil is not a thing in and of itself. Like, it's not a tangible item. Rather, it's the absence of something. It's not a bad definition, but it's not a complete definition. I think a better definition of evil is it is the corruption of what is good. So evil is a corruption of what is good. So after all, when people say that something is evil, what are they doing? They are comparing it to that which is not evil. Like, whenever you experience something that's wrong or bad or evil, what you're saying is that it is not how it ought to be. Like, there's something about it that's broken or skewed or not exactly the way it was designed to be. I mean, imagine every movie or storyline in literature that you have encountered. It is a battle between what? Good and evil, right? And you compare that which is evil based off of that which is good. You kind of make an establishing marker, a standard off of it. Do you have a question? Do you have a comment? Oh, yeah, you just agree. So let me give you some examples. Like, we believe that poverty and genocide are evil, right? But the reason we believe those are evil is because we believe they are corruptions of things that are good. Like, we believe that people shouldn't go hungry. We believe that people shouldn't have to just lose their life for no reason or reasons outside of their doing. Those are bad because they go against what is actually good. Therefore, evil only makes sense if you already have a belief in what is good. So let me give you another example. So counterfeit currency. Okay, think about counterfeit currency. Counterfeit currency is the corruption of what? Real currency, right? The real tangible stuff. And you can have currency and not have counterfeit of it in a perfect world. But you cannot have counterfeit without having the real thing to begin with. And it's similar with evil. When we judge something to being evil, we are comparing it to what we believe is good. That's why bank tellers, they're actually trained. They're not trained to be able to tell what all of the different counterfeit options are out there. What they are trained is, what does the real stuff look like? What does real bills smell like and feel like in your hands? That's what they're trained, because any moment you come across something that is not the actual thing, it must be fake. So when this terrible thing happened to Darian and I, we are able to call it wrong and we're able to call it evil because we are comparing it to what we believe is good and right? What is orderly, what is in line with how it's supposed to be. So if that's how we define evil, so evil is not just the absence of something or the absence of everything good, it's the corruption of what is good. But in order for you to have that definition, you have to understand what is good. Like, who gets to decide what is good? Who gets to decide what is right? What is the right way? Who establishes the standard by which evil is judged by, right? So that's what we need to tackle next. What does it mean to be good? So as Christians, Christianity teaches that goodness is an attribute of God. So it is a necessary expression of God's character. So God does not determine things as good. Like, he doesn't look at this plant, and he didn't determine that plant as good if it was a real plant and he was creating it, right? It is good because he created it. Like, because it came from his nature, it is good in and of itself. Okay? This is abstract. This is confusing. It's hard to fully grasp without really spending a lot of time with it. So let's look at it from the other side. If you do not define God, or if you do not use God to define goodness, what option are you actually left with? Like, if God is not your standard to establish goodness, then what option do you have to establish what is good? So for many people who object to rooting goodness in God, as Christians do, they say, well, why can't I, or why can't society at large? Why can't the society decide what is large? Why can't the society at large decide what is good? So, like, in this room, we are a miniature society. We're going to go establish our own governance or our own town. Why can we not establish what is right for us? This is what cults do, right? Like, this is the cult life. Is the cult decides within our community, we get to decide what is good and what's not good. And it goes against a lot of what the standard rightness and wrongness is of the world. So the problem with that, just like with cults, and that just came off the dome, so I'm really enjoying that idea. The problem with allowing societies or allowing individual people to establish what is good is that it's subjective. It can change per time, per location. So let me just do a little a survey. Whenever I say subjective and objective, do we know what I mean by that? Should I define it? Okay, let me define it. So objective truth is a truth that is true no matter what, against whatever your opinion might be. So the boiling point of water, or the freezing point of water, is 0 degrees Celsius, right? That is an objective truth. You don't have to agree with it, but it doesn't change the actual truth of it. It's objective. It cannot be refuted unless it's experimented and refuted. So we have objective truths that we prove wrong. Like, this isn't a good example, but the earth is flat. Okay, until that's proven wrong, then we can reestablish it as a different objective truth. But that's beside the point. Subjective truth is a truth that's right for you, but may not be right for me. So I think chocolate ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. And that's true for me, but it may not be true for you, right? You're shaking your head, no, it's not true for you. So that's the difference between objective truth and subjective truth. And whenever we allow goodness to be defined by an individual or by a society, it becomes subjective. It's able to be morphed and changed based off of a time in history, based off a location, based off an agenda that they have, again, going back to cults. So the mass majority would say, when it comes to like rape, okay, let's go pretty extreme. Rape is a bad thing, right? I think all of us in here, I hope all of us in here would say it is a bad thing. And the average person in the world would say it is a bad thing. But if I'm letting society or individuals decide what is right and wrong, why do we here get to decide that rape is wrong? Why do we get to decide that that is bad and it's not good? For a rapist or someone who finds pleasure and joy out of that, it is good for them. So why does my truth over trump their truth if there's not some objective truth out there outside of us and outside of humanity pointing us and establishing the right thing? So as Christians, we know that there is a moral standard embedded in us. We talked about this when we talked about morality a couple weeks ago, right? That there's something inside of us that points us, is like a compass pointing us to what is right. It starts in us as kids, it develops over time, and it's like there's no way to fully explain where it comes from, but it is a moral truth that is beyond subjective. It's outside of ourselves, and as Christians, we believe it's God. So let me give a disclaimer before I give you an example of this put into practice. So notice I am not what I'm not saying here. I'm not saying that you have to believe in God in order to do good things. I'm not saying that. I believe atheists can do good things. They can formulate ethical life and never refer to God in the process, and they do. What I am saying is that without God, good and evil do not exist. There is no standard to establish what is good and what is wrong outside of a society. There is no true evil and true good. There is no concept of wrong in that outside of an objective model given for us, an objective standard. So God. We recognize that comes from God. Some people don't. So that's what I am saying, but you can still formulate ethical ideas. Okay, so let me give you an example of this put into practice. So in Nuremberg, Germany, Nazis were being charged. There was this trial right here. Here's all your Nazis right there, all lined up in a row for you. They were being charged for crimes against humanity. I'm sure you all know what those crimes are. If you don't, look to the right. The courts, however, ran into a problem whenever they were trying to charge the Nazis. The problem is that the Nazis, they couldn't be tried off of the laws of the Allied forces, the forces that, kind of ended the war. They couldn't be charged off of that because the crimes took place in Germany. And so location-wise, they couldn't charge them. But they also couldn't be charged by the German law because at that time, what they did was not illegal in the German law. Hitler and his party had been very careful leading up to the Holocaust to pass laws to ensure that their heinous acts were sanctioned. So they were perfectly legal to do what they were doing. Allied forces couldn't charge them because it was on German soil. So what do? How do you charge people for these heinous acts against you? Heinous acts against humanity, sorry. So in order to charge the Nazis against their actions, that they were criminal, the judges appealed to a moral authority that was higher than a person or society. This is what they did in a court of law, a very international court of law. And this was accomplished by what they called the rule according to higher law. It's a law that is over man's law, essentially, right? Clearly referring to some kind of higher moral standard that's embedded inside of us as people, but may not be written down or can be established within a community. So this is a very clear example of what happens whenever you allow societies or individuals to establish their laws. You have to go above them whenever things like this happen. And even Hitler knew I have a side note, Hitler knew his actions were wrong. Historians note that he never signed anything too closely associated with the camps. All orders were given verbally or in secret. And so there's many historians who don't even think he knew about it, which is very false. But he knew that the killing of all these people was ghastly evil, but he wanted to separate himself from it, right? Because there was something inside of him that told him this is wrong, right? And that's what we're referring to. Okay, so any exploration of where evil comes from when it comes to the Bible and why God allows it, we have to go to the beginning, right? We have to go play and spend some time in Genesis real quick. So just a reminder, the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, especially the garden scene, it's not concerned with telling us how things took place. It's not a history book that you go and refer to and say, here's what actually literally happened. What Genesis, the garden scene, is more concerned about is telling you who was behind the actions and what happened between God and humanity in that relationship. So when God, in the beginning, created all things, he created them to be good and wholly good. In fact, at the end of every one of his creations, he says it was good, right? That's because it flowed from God's character. However, so here's the point. However, just because something was created wholly good does not mean it didn't have the potential to be corrupted, right? And that's where we use this term, and maybe you've heard it before, this term called free will. And this is where free will comes in, and it's a huge component when we talk about evil and suffering, and we're going to talk about it more here in a second. But the Genesis account, it's a telling of our story. It's a story of how God made Adam and Eve, right, the first humans, to live in perfect relationship with him in the Garden of Eden. However, because they were made free, because Adam and Eve, just like you and I, we have the potential to break the relationship with God. We have that potential, hence eating the fruit and hiding from God and casting the blame and justifying their actions, right? They have the potential to break that relationship. And humanity's relationship with God and with each other, it was broken in those first moments, but here's the thing, we are breaking them every moment, every day. We are participating in it. Like when they sought to define good and bad on their own, it's something that we do every day when we wake up. We define evil on our own, and what we're doing is we're denying God's definition, and we're corrupting creation in the process. We're saying, God, you have established what is good, but I don't want to be a part of that. I want to choose what is good in my eyes, and look where it leads. So the Bible makes it very clear that God did not create evil. People did. And people do. And we do it all the time. But the question remains, if God is both all-powerful and all-good, why would he allow humans that choice? Like, why would he allow them to have that option, to be corrupted and to corrupt other people? Like, why even give them that option? So that is where we run into the love problem. I'll wait for it to get to that. So the truth is, we don't really know why. We won't know. We don't know why God allowed or continues to allow evil. It's a mystery. The prophet Isaiah, he says that God's ways and thoughts are higher than ours, and he just hasn't seen fit to explain everything to us. And in part, we're going to have to settle with that we don't have the answer for all the questions out there. And science doesn't have the answer for all their questions either. But I do want to offer a credible suggestion for you. And now we can go to this. So if we want to understand why God allows it, we have to lay out what options did God have in creating the universe, right? So I could think of 4, and if you can think of another good one, then we can talk about it. So the first option is that God could have created no world and therefore no evil, which sounds pretty good, but as human beings who depend on substance to survive, this isn't a really good option for us. So we can just kind of mark that one off. But if you want to remove evil, you can remove matter altogether and space and time, and there you go. Second option, maybe a little more credible, you could have the same world but no free will in the process. So in this case, you don't need morality, right? You don't need to define what is good and bad because God just creates little robot people that does what he wants. So this gets into the conversation of what does a little girl enjoy more? Does she enjoy a baby doll who she forces to love her or a puppy dog who chooses to love her? Like, which of those is the greater kind of love? The one that is forced or the one that is chosen? And that kind of refutes this argument, that when free will is removed, it's not truly love. It's not expressed in it. It's just like planting a garden, and it's like planting fake garden. That's a good example. It's like putting these in the ground and saying, my garden will always be flourishing, because they're fake. Like they don't have a choice to die or live in that case. So again, if you can remove all the vices, but you can't have any virtues in the process. The third option is you can have the same world with free creatures, but you can constantly intervene when something goes wrong. So it's like, I tried to imagine what this could look like. And all I could think about is like, you're at dinner with a friend, and you get mad at your friend. It's a terrible friend, not really a friend, but you decide you're going to stab him. But as soon as you go to stab, God turns the knife into like a little rubber knife. And it's like, it's almost comical to think about. It's like, what does this even look like for God to intervene? And at what level does he intervene? Like, what is the true difference between a little boy hitting his brother and a grown man killing his brother. We know there's a difference, but where do you draw that line? At what level do you draw that line? And even if you can draw the line, again, you are removing free will from the equation. They are not really free. I do not have the freedom to kill my brother. You have taken it away from me. So is it actually choice and love to do it that way? No. So the only true option you have is you have the same world with free creatures with the possibility to choose both good or bad. In morality, it requires both options. Like, in order to choose good, there needs to be the option to not choose good. And perhaps this is why God allows evil, in order to allow the most noble ethics of all, the ability to choose love. And maybe that's why evil exists, so that we can choose love. C.S. Lewis has this awesome quote. He says, "Why then did God give them free will? Because free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes any love or goodness or joy worth having." So for God, it was worth the risk. And it still is worth the risk. You create humans with free will, knowing that they're going to choose evil. And maybe that still troubles you, but think about that's the conundrum that every parent faces right before they have kids. Like, why have kids if you know that they're going to disobey you one day? That they're going to make terrible choices, that they might even hurt you? Why have them in the first place then? Because love. Because you love them and because you want to raise them to love you and others in return. Right? Which brings me to the final point and brings us full circle. Atheists will often claim that if something is wholly good, then it just automatically eliminates any evil that exists in the world. And what I would have to say to that is the Bible teaches something a little bit differently. And the Bible teaches that just because, like, how do I know if God eliminates everything evil, that he is not also eliminating a greater good later on down the road? So if you know your Bible, back in Genesis, at the very end, Joseph has many brothers. And at a young age, they sell him off to slavery. They pretend he's dead. They approach his father. Your son's dead. He goes off to slavery. He ends up in Egypt and works his way up the ranks. And eventually becomes like right-hand man to Pharaoh. And begins, he institutes this economic principle, and it saves him from drought and famine. And Pharaoh's like, man, you're the man. And then all of a sudden, many years later, his brothers and his family are in famine and are looking to Egypt for survival. We need you to help survive. Give us the grain that you saved up. And they don't recognize his brother until a little bit later. It's a fun story. But when they finally recognize him, he makes this comment to them. His brothers, who betrayed him many years ago and who are now asking for help from the brother they betrayed. He said, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Now, what I'm not saying is that God institutes evil in our lives so that he can make something good happen. What I am saying is that God captures evil in our life. He captures it. He knows it exists. He knows that it's there. He knows we bring it on ourselves and bring it to each other. So what he does is he captures it and he helps something better come out of it. Which leads us full circle to Darian and I's story. So without Darian and I's miscarriage at the beginning or the end of last year, we would not have the boys in our life. I don't think we would have the boys in our life right now. And that's a roller coaster of events that took place. And if we could take that back, that moment at the end of last year, I think in many ways, yes, we would. Do I think God grieves the loss of our first baby? Absolutely, I think he does. But I think God captured a moment of evil that exists in the world, exists in his good world, and he's doing, and we trust that he's doing a process to bring about a greater good from it than we could ever imagine. And so when we approach evil and suffering in this life and in this world, that's what we have to have in mind. It's here, and it's not the absence of a good God, but it's a good God working through both the free will to allow it to happen, but also bringing about greater things from it.